That was really the question I wanted to set up our Dharma reflection with is why do you sit? What is it that brings you to this practice of non-doing? And it isn't the easiest thing in the world to do sometimes, and not always the most exciting thing we could do. And it's not productive in the ways that society defines productivity. And yet something draws us here and draws most of us here again and again. And so this question came up in the MBSR, the mindfulness-based stress reduction class that I'm teaching on Wednesdays. The question, why meditate in this form, following the breath, this moment-to-moment experience? And there are lots of ways to cope with stress. You know, we can do gardening, we can go for a walk, we can spend time with a loved one. The class had a whole list that we created together. So why sit? Why meditate? So I want to look at that today. And what I've noticed over the years at ICD and groups like ours is when I talk to people about why they come and what they really value, a big part of it is the being in silence together, is the meditation that we do together. And when I started practicing in groups like this, I'd often check on the teacher with one eye and see what they were up to. You know, is she still awake? You know, has she forgotten about us? How long is this going to go on? Is she doing it too? That was always a big question. And sometimes people feel like jumping up and running out of the room. I hear that sometimes. I don't actually see people do that very much, but I know what it feels like. I've had that feeling too. And it says something that we don't get up and run out of the room. Because in a world that's constantly pulling us into action and reaction and consumption and distraction, this sitting quietly together is a radical act. It's an act of reclaiming our attention, of saying, for this moment, I will not be swept away. For this moment, I will be present. So no secret that we are living in a time of extraordinary uncertainty and fearfulness. Trying to follow the news of the last month is head spinning and overwhelming and painful. And the news cycle, of course, is relentless, confusing, alarming, and people are being hurt. Social media fuels more outrage and more despair. And many of us feel like we're caught in a storm, being pulled in all sorts of directions by forces that are much bigger than us and out of our control. And it feels like we may need to be with this for a long time. And so here we are, sitting, choosing to take refuge in presence, in community, and going against the stream of the dominant culture, engaging in this radical act of intentional presence together. So, so it might be that we started exploring meditation because we wanted relief from stress, or we wanted to feel a little calmer, more at ease in the world and our skins, or maybe we're fatigued by our scattered lives and the culture that we live in that encourages that scatteredness. Or maybe we don't know exactly what we're looking for, but something in us knows there must be another way. There must be another way of relating to life. So it's an important contemplation. Why do you sit? Why do I do this? So Buddhism and meditation are almost synonymous. The Buddha is most often depicted in a seated meditation posture, and the cultural visual image that we carry of Buddhists is, you know, people sitting on a cushion in a perfect lotus position with rainbow rays emanating from their heads. And yet, meditation isn't so much about achieving some special state. It's about seeing clearly. The clear seeing, the deep looking is the heart of the practice. Shamatha vipassana, shamatha calming, vipassana clear seeing. So in one of the Buddha's teachings, the Majjhima Nikaya, I'm not sure which sutta, but he's talking to his disciple and cousin Ananda. And he says to Ananda, what should be done for his disciples out of compassion by a teacher who seeks their welfare and has compassion for them, that I have done for you, Ananda. In other words, I've taught you what I know. And then the Buddha says, oh, wow, I thought that was a mouse. Does it need to be rescued? Yes, it's perception. Well, that's good. So the Buddha is saying, you know, I've taught you out of compassion what I know. And then he says to Ananda, there are the roots of trees. Here are empty huts. Meditate, Ananda. Do not delay, or else you will regret it later. This is my instruction to you. There are the roots of trees. Here are empty huts. Meditate, Ananda. Do not delay. So the Buddha is saying, I've given you the teaching, I've given you the tools. Now you go and practice with them. See for yourself. Meditation is our tool for seeing with clarity. It's not about believing anything. It's about our actual direct experience. So Joseph Goldstein, a senior insight teacher, puts it this way. Meditation has to do with opening what is closed in us, balancing what is reactive, and exploring and investigating what is hidden. And when we look closely, we begin to see how much of our suffering comes not just from what happens in the world, but from how we react and respond to it. So when we start getting curious about our thinking and we engage in these longer sits, we see that we have been conditioned by a culture that is driven by what the Buddha identified as the three poisons of mind and heart: greed, hatred, and delusion. And if we look, we can see how they're actively cultivated and amped up in this world that we're inhabiting right now. Greed fuels consumerism, and it fuels economic systems that thrive on discontent and scarcity and fear. Hatred, othering, fuels division, separation between neighbors, between family members, between communities, political parties, nations. And then delusion does its work of keeping us distracted and disconnected from our own experience, our interconnection. And it does a really good job of numbing us out too. So when we meditate, we're stepping outside of that system of greed, hatred, and delusion. We're saying, I don't have to be ruled by these forces. In the Zen tradition, they say often, just sit. Those are the pith instructions. Just sit. That's all you need to do. Don't try and do anything. And there's so much truth in that. Let the moment come to you. And so sometimes it may seem that meditation is passive, that it's somehow disengaging from the world, that we go slack. But this is a misperception. The practice isn't about turning away. In letting the moment come to us in the non-doing, we're actually doing something quite profound. We're allowing what's here to be seen and known as it is without our habitual overlays of reactivity, as free as we can be from greed, hatred, and delusion. So Thich Nhat Hanh put it this way: the practice is not to suppress or run away from suffering, but to touch it with mindfulness and tenderness. If we embrace our suffering with mindfulness, the energy of mindfulness will begin to penetrate it, just as the sun penetrates the flower. So this is what, it occurred to me, my inner and outer world needs. And it begins with knowing our own minds. And while, you know, stress reduction techniques like gardening or going for a walk or engaging in a pleasant activity may be wise ways of calming the nervous system and coping with stress, it's actually the deep witnessing of the meditative mind that allows us to know our experience clearly and to interrupt the patterns of pain and suffering that have been unconscious. So I personally became seriously interested in Buddhism and meditation about 20 years ago, and I had the privilege to visit the amazing Asian nation of Bhutan. So Bhutan is near Nepal. It's between India and Tibet, and it's an uncolonized, intact culture. It's a Buddhist kingdom. And the government is famously more interested in gross national happiness than it is in the usual economic markers. And amazing to experience a place where that actually feels true. And the practice of Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism is woven into the arts, the architecture, the dance, the culture, the music. It permeates everything. It's a culture of practice. Children are practicing, grandparents are practicing. People remind themselves of practice through engaging in ritual. People who can't practice in the moment because they're busy with their lives support the practice of others and support monastics and hold their own intentions to practice when they can. And I could feel this foundation everywhere we went, like a substrate of stillness, even in the midst of a vibrant, growing country. And part of it came home with me. It was like someone had lit a small candle and placed it into the palm of my hands, and I wanted to take it home carefully, and keep it lit and place it on my altar. I wanted to cultivate that stillness. I wanted to see if I could feel that in my own life. So I started reading about meditation and beginning to sit as much as I could. And then I discovered, oh, this is not as effortless as it looks. The stillness isn't right here immediately. And I started to see into the nature of my mind a little bit, the scatteredness of my attention, the directions that my mind went regularly that were really painful. I got to see how much time my mind goes to regret, to shame, to fear. And it wasn't pretty. And I thought, well, this can't possibly be right because I'm not getting any calmer so far. And there's no bliss at all. So either there's something wrong with me or there's something wrong with this practice. And this is where sometimes people feel like, yeah, I think I'd rather just go garden or read a good book. But what was really happening for me and what happens to us on the meditative journey is that we finally show up for our life in a new way, attending to our lives and beginning to see our own suffering and starting to know it and the internal nature of it and how it arises and hear the voices that I'd been ignoring and suppressing. And beginning to see that maybe there was some truth in the Buddhist teaching that the origin and the relief of suffering might possibly be within me. The Buddha taught that all of our experience takes place within this fathom-long body, as he termed it. So when we meditate, we're developing the tool to look deeply at what's here, literally right here in this fathom-long body. Our thoughts, our sensations, our emotions. A way of coming into presence with ourselves and not pushing away what we don't like. So actually, my meditation was going just fine. I was getting to see what's actually here and to begin to make peace with it. And it wasn't always comfortable, and it isn't always comfortable now. But this is the first noble truth, understanding and seeing our own unease, aligning ourselves with truth, with life as it is right now, instead of separating from it or feeling that it's wrong. So another insight teacher, Gil Fronsdal, talks about this, how mindfulness works when it doesn't work. And he says, if you can remain with the breath then obviously mindfulness of breathing is working. However, if your attempt to stay with the breath results in increased awareness of what pulls you away from the breath, then the practice is also working. Very clever, Gil. uh, yeah. So the more that I practice, the more I reclaim my life, the more I reclaim it from distractedness or this feeling that ordinary reality isn't enough, when really ordinary reality is the most extraordinary thing when I pay attention. It's infinite, limitless. I sit to come back to life. And my practice can be really simple. Sometimes I think of it as just being centered like the prow of a ship with the weather and waves all around me, just moving forward through life steadily, no matter what's rushing past. And sometimes the weather is calm and clear, and of course, sometimes it's not at all. But can I bring a sense of clear, stable, non-judgmental awareness to what's arising? Is it possible to remember and move from my own center? When the mind is very agitated, can I come back to the body, the breath, touch, sound, ground, and look at what's here? So I love this next teaching because it's so true and it kind of blew my mind. So the practice reminds us that all we need to do is be present. It's not easy undoing the tangles of distraction, but this teaching is that our touch can be very light. And this comes from a very wise Burmese teacher, Sayadaw U Tejaniya. And he asks his students to actually notice the effort it takes to be aware. Because we think it's this big, difficult thing. But he says, so for example, you know you're sitting right now. You recognize the sensations of sitting. We can all do that. And you know that you're breathing. Can recognize the sensations of breath. And then he asks you to notice that you're seeing in this moment. Just opening the eyes, seeing. And how much energy does that take? Does that actually take? How much effort does that actually take to recognize that seeing is happening or that breathing is happening? And so his gift in that teaching is that that's enough energy. So that's what it can be like to fall awake in any moment. So you're driving down 111 and just like that, you can wake up to this moment right now. Oh, here's the body, here's the breath, here's seeing happening. And suddenly you're alive. And then sometimes it's like I have the intention to have a mindful day, and then it's 8 p.m. and I think, what happened to my mindful day? So sometimes it's like that. And that's another way this training, our regular meditation, supports us. Because it's not just sitting for the moments that we're sitting, it's creating an intention to bring that energy forward and live with more mindfulness. So we fall awake more and more frequently. The Buddha in the Dhammapada said, better it is to live one wise and meditative day than 100 years foolish and uncontrolled. So when we sit on the cushion or the chair or a room like this, we are making the conditions easy for ourselves. It's sort of like going to the gym or a yoga class. We are setting aside this time with all the right equipment. all favorable conditions to develop this particular kind of muscle, our attention, this skill of paying attention to ourselves and our experience. And the more we practice, the more we have this foundation that allows our conditioning, allows us to see our conditioning in relief. So I like to think of this, it's as though our awareness is a piece of black velvet, and whatever gets tossed on it comes into sharp relief and can be known. And then I contrast that, to when it gets tossed into the junk drawer of my mind. Mm-hmm. So meditation can help us create a substrate, a foundation that allows us to see clearly. So I went to my car in the Trader Joe's parking lot and I could barely open the door because someone had parked so close to me. And the judgmental conditioning was there immediately. How incredibly thoughtless and rude. People are so selfish. I would never do that. And the owner of that car became immediately the enemy in my mind. I have no idea what they looked like, who they were, whatever. But suddenly I knew all about them and how they voted and what they thought about everything. And there was also just enough mindfulness in that moment to see, oh, here's suffering coming up. I'm creating an adversary in my mind. Here's a pattern of the mind arising right now in this moment that leads to unhappiness, to anger, to stress. And there is nothing wrong with me that this is happening. This is just what it is to be a human being. But I know from experience that I can incline the mind in more skillful ways if I can see this moment. And the continued practice of mindfulness is what makes that possible. So I wanted to share this quote from Viktor Frankl, who's the famous doctor, philosopher, and concentration camp survivor who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And he's credited with this quote, actually. No one can seem to find it in any of his works. So maybe he gave it at a symposium. But the quote is, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And this is why we practice regularly, to have access to that space. And so I didn't react, physically. I didn't key their car. I didn't kick it. I didn't leave an angry note. I'm a Dharma teacher. I'm not supposed to do that. But I saw my own mind doing its thing. And in the seeing, I was able to release it, to let it go. Yes, this is inconvenient for me right now, but that's the whole story. I didn't know anything more than that. So just enough mindfulness to incline the mind in a healthier direction. A choice appears because of the mindfulness, because there's a little background, a substrate, awareness being made accessible. So Thich Nhat Hanh calls the practice the way of awareness. And I like to contrast that with the way of distraction. Which way do I want to go? Because usually if we ask ourselves that, is this the way of awareness or this is the way of distraction? We know. So Sayadaw U Tejaniya again, remember that there are always the knowing and known minds. The known minds don't have to be calm, don't have to be peaceful. They can be angry, raging, all that can be going on. All that needs to be steady is the knowing. That's the only steadiness that you need, the steadiness of the knowing mind. So we keep practicing, and the effects are cumulative. The Buddha likened freedom to walking into the ocean out along the continental shelf. There's this very gradual deepening of the water, and then there's a sudden drop off into the depths. And we don't know quite where that will be. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but when you suddenly take that next step and there's nothing there. We don't know where that entry into the deep water of freedom will be, but we keep practicing, we keep sitting, we keep being present, keep walking forward. So I can put down my strategies and open to life with humility, letting it teach me rather than trying to force it into what I think it should be or force myself into who I think I should be. All that we're really doing is sitting with life, however it's revealing itself. And when we pay attention, we're not paying attention only to our individual circumstances and experiences, but to the shared experience of being human. Unless I'm living in delusion outside of what the Buddha termed right view, I can't separate myself from the suffering and pain of others or social injustice. When I really look, I know and I can see that my actions and my inactions have impact. So, how do I not add to the suffering of others? How do I help to alleviate it? Is my sitting on the cushion in the morning of any use? Yes. Anything that leads to less ignorance in our lives is a net positive. So, one more quote from the Buddha. You should carefully assume those practices which I have taught you for the sake of direct knowledge, in other words, meditation. You should practice them, cultivate them, and make much of them so that this practice will last for a long time. This is for the welfare of the multitudes, the benefit, welfare, and happiness of gods and humans. This is out of compassion for the world. So the Buddha said that very plainly. Sometimes people will teach that this is a path of individual freedom, but the Buddha is saying this is for the welfare of the multitudes, the benefit, welfare, and happiness of gods and humans. This is something that we do out of compassion. And we're not in this alone. The problems that we face of social injustice and exploitation and violence and environmental destruction are problems that require deep and universal changes in consciousness, as far away as that might seem right now. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote in the heart of the Buddha's teaching, our problems today are no longer as simple as those encountered by the Buddha. In the 21st century, we will have to practice meditation collectively as a family, a city, a nation, and a community of nations. The Buddha of the 21st century, Maitreya, the Buddha of love, may well be a community rather than an individual. Sanghas that practice loving kindness and compassion are the Buddha that we need. I get chills reading that. He says, our practice is the most important work that we can do. And this isn't mysticism or just beautiful words, because we can see this for ourselves. Meditation increases mindfulness. This increases our ability to act mindfully, to consume mindfully, and to bring more love and care into the world, to celebrate, support, and cultivate the beautiful qualities in ourselves and others. So just to close with a quote from Ajahn Chah, a Thai Buddhist master. Try to be mindful and let things take their natural course. Then your mind will become still in any surroundings, like a clear forest pool. All kinds of wonderful, rare animals will come to drink at the pool, and you will see clearly the nature of all things. You will see many strange and wonderful things come and go, but you will be still. This is the happiness of the Buddha. So this is why I meditate, to reclaim my attention, to meet life fully. So just taking a moment to feel into that a little bit, reconnecting to our bodies and breath. So why meditate? I am really curious to know why you meditate. Why do you do this thing? Why do you show up? What is it about the practice that engages you? Where do you find value in it? So really just curious to know what comes up for folks and if anyone would like to share. Yeah. So I'm going to share screen. And just before we read this together, I just want to mention that ICD is completely volunteer run and it's supported by your donations, your generosity of time, your presence, and also your financial donations. So there are two baskets in the back of the room, and you are invited into the practice of what the Buddha called dana, which is the action of giving. And there's chaga, which precedes it, which is the intention to give, the energy of giving. And then there's dana, which is actually acting on that. So please support us and the teachings as you are able to. And let's offer this together. Let me get it up on the screen for our folks online. Okay, so let's see. I need to just, there we go. So let's not read the first going forth. We'll just start with the first line. Going forth into this world so in need of light, may I bring all lightness and wisdom I embody to each being and each situation that I meet. May the power of my practice today strengthen my resolve to be an agent of peace and justice in this world. Going forth together into this world so in need of light, may we together bring all the kindness and wisdom we embody to each being and each situation that we meet. May the power of our practice today strengthen our resolve to be agents of peace and justice in this world. We dedicate our practice for the liberation of all beings, the great, the small, the wise, the ignorant, the powerful and the powerless. May all beings be liberated from sorrow and loss, hatred and injustice, scarcity and want, and every form of suffering. May our practice today be a prayer for peace, and may it benefit all beings without exception. Thank you all, dear ones, and look around the circle and spend at these beautiful beings and online who share the energies of the heart with each other in this way. And thank you for being here and hope to practice with you again very soon. Thank you. So welcome. And thanks Thanks for your patience online, folks, learning
Thank you,
everything
Ian.
to do this. Thank you.